I still remember the sound of the front door creaking open that evening, the chilly December wind sneaking into the house. It was a familiar sound, but something felt off. I was working from home, barely glancing up from my laptop until I heard the quiet sniffles. There she stood, my daughter Mia, her face streaked with tears. She didn't say a word at first. Instead, she placed a neatly wrapped gift bag on the table in front of me, her hands trembling slightly. "Mom, look at this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. My heart clenched. "What happened, sweetheart?" I asked gently, walking over to her. Her lips quivered as she tried to hold back the tears. "Why do I have to go through this?" I didn't know what she meant, but I could see the pain in her eyes. Slowly, I reached for the gift bag, dreading what might be inside. The package was neatly wrapped, too neatly for a casual Christmas party. I peeled back the wrapping, trying to keep my hand steady. Inside was a torn newspaper, with shredded pieces of paper that I immediately recognized. My heart sank further when I noticed Mia's reading project, a reflection she'd worked so hard on, ripped to shreds. But that wasn't all. There was a card inside, scrawled in messy red ink. "Don't get too arrogant, or you'll end up like this." Shaking, I reached in again, only to pull out a disfigured stuffed animal. It had been torn apart, its fabric stained with what looked like red ink to resemble blood. My stomach twisted in horror. This wasn't just a cruel prank. This was a deliberate act meant to intimidate. Mia stood there, watching my reaction, waiting for me to say something, anything, that might make sense of what she'd just endured. "It was from her," she finally said, her voice trembling. Her. I didn't need to ask who Mia meant. There was only one person who could have done something like this, my sister-in-law, Amanda. I sat at the kitchen table, holding that mangled stuffed animal in my hands. My mind raced, trying to piece everything together. Mia had just returned from the Christmas party at my in-laws' house, what should have been a fun, festive evening. Instead, she came home looking like the world had turned on her. "Are you sure it was Amanda?" I asked carefully, not wanting to jump to conclusions. Mia nodded slowly. She handed it to me herself. She said it was special. Her voice cracked at the last word. I felt a surge of anger boiling inside me. Amanda had always been difficult. She had never liked me, and I had learned to tolerate her snarky comments for the sake of keeping peace in the family. But this was something else. Targeting my daughter? No, that crossed a line. I hugged Mia tightly, whispering, "I'm so sorry, baby. None of this is your fault. We're going to figure this out." She stayed in my arms for a while, sniffling quietly. Finally, she pulled back and looked up at me, her brown eyes full of hurt. "Why does she hate us, Mom? What did we do to her?" I didn't know how to answer. How do you explain to a 9-year-old that some people thrive on bitterness and resentment? Amanda had never needed a reason to criticize me. From the day I married her younger brother, Ethan, she made her disapproval crystal clear. "I was too old for him," she said. "I rushed him into marriage," she said. "And when I got pregnant not long after our wedding? Well, that was just more fuel for her nasty remarks." She loved to make comments about my appearance, pointing out every wrinkle, every stretch mark, as if my age defined me. I used to brush it off. "Don't let her get to you," Ethan would tell me. And for the most part, I didn't. But now that Mia was involved, all bets were off. Later that evening, Ethan came home from work, his tie slightly askew and his face tired from a long day. He barely had time to set his briefcase down before I blurted out, "We need to talk." His eyes narrowed with concern. "What's wrong?" Mia was already upstairs, so I handed him the gift bag. She came home with this. Ethan pulled out the shredded paper and the stuffed animal, his face darkening with every second. "What the hell?" "Exactly." He sat down at the table, running a hand through his hair. "Amanda did this?" Mia had been too shaken to lie. "She handed it to her herself," I confirmed. "There's no doubt." Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the torn newspaper and the chilling card. She's completely lost it. Yeah, and I'm done pretending everything's fine. For years, we both tried to keep the peace. Every family dinner, every holiday gathering, I bit my tongue while Amanda made her passive-aggressive comments. But this? This was an attack on our daughter. Ethan looked at me, his expression unreadable. What do you want to do? I'm going to the police. His eyebrows shot up. The police? She threatened our daughter, Ethan. This isn't some petty family feud. It's harassment. And it's terrifying. For a moment, he looked conflicted. I could see the gears turning in his head, trying to balance loyalty to his family with the need to protect his own. Okay, he said finally. Let's do it. But first, I'm calling my parents. They need to know. That phone call was awkward. Ethan's parents, Joan and Robert, had always been kind to me, but they had a blind spot when it came to Amanda. Are you sure? Joan asked after Ethan explained what had happened. Yes, Mom, he replied, his voice firm. There's no doubt. There was a long pause before she sighed heavily. I had no idea she was even at the party. What do you mean? I cut in, confused. Joan sounded embarrassed. I didn't invite her. She wasn't supposed to be there. Ethan and I exchanged a glance. So, how did she show up? He asked. I think she must have come through the back door while I was busy setting up, Joan admitted. There were a lot of kids running around, and I was trying to keep everything organized. I didn't even notice her until she was leaving. That made it even worse. Amanda hadn't just attended the party, she had snuck in. Joan sounded genuinely upset. I'm so sorry, you two. I'll talk to her. This isn't acceptable. Thank you, Ethan said quietly. After he hung up, we sat in silence for a while. She's not going to stop, I finally said. You know that, right? Ethan nodded grimly. Yeah, I know. And that's how we ended up at the police station the next morning. When we walked in, I was nervous. Would they take us seriously? Or would they dismiss this as some family drama? The officer at the desk looked bored at first, but when I showed him the card and the shredded project, his expression changed. This was given to your daughter? He asked, clearly alarmed. Yes, I said, by her aunt. He glanced at Ethan. And you're sure about this? Absolutely, Ethan replied without hesitation. The officer took a deep breath. Okay, this is serious. Threatening a child is no joke. We'll issue a formal warning. A warning. It felt like a slap on the wrist, but at least it was something. When we got home, Mia was curled up on the couch, reading one of her favorite books. She looked up as we walked in. Did you tell them? She asked softly. I nodded. The police are going to talk to her. She won't bother you again. Mia's shoulders relaxed a little, but I could still see the worry in her eyes. She's just mean, Mia said quietly. I don't understand why. I knelt down next to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Sometimes people hurt others because they're hurting inside, but that doesn't make it right. Mia nodded slowly, though I wasn't sure she fully understood. How could she? I hugged her tight. She's not going to win, I whispered. We won't let her. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Amanda wasn't the kind of person to back down easily. And I was right. For a few days, things were quiet. Too quiet. I was constantly on edge, half expecting Amanda to show up at our door or call to stir up more drama. But instead, there was nothing. Mia seemed to be slowly getting back to her usual self, though I could tell the incident still weighed heavily on her. Every now and then, I'd catch her staring off into space, lost in thought. It broke my heart. Then, out of the blue, Ethan got a call from his parents. They want us to come over, he told me, rubbing the back of his neck. They've called a family meeting. I rolled my eyes. Of course they have. Family meetings were Joan's way of handling any conflict within the family. Usually they ended with a lot of polite nodding, vague apologies, and absolutely no resolution. But this time felt different. Do you think Amanda will show up? I asked, folding my arms. She will, Ethan said grimly. She won't be able to resist. When we arrived at his parents' house, I could feel the tension in the air before we even stepped inside. Joan greeted us at the door, her usual warm smile replaced by a worried expression. "I'm so sorry about all of this," she whispered, pulling me into a quick hug. I gave her a small smile. "Let's just get through this." We walked into the living room, where the rest of the family was already gathered. Amanda wasn't there yet, but her husband, Mark, was sitting on the couch, looking uncomfortable. I'd always liked Mark. He was quiet, respectful, and seemed genuinely kind. I often wondered how he put up with Amanda's antics. Before anyone could say much, the front door opened, and Amanda strolled in like she owned the place. She had that smug look on her face, the one that always made my blood boil. "Ah, the whole gang's here," she said, her voice dripping with fake cheerfulness. Nobody responded. Ethan stood up, his expression hard. "We need to talk." Amanda raised an eyebrow. "Is this about that little misunderstanding with the gift? Because honestly, you're overreacting." "Overreacting?" I snapped, unable to stay quiet any longer. "You gave my daughter a shredded project, a mangled toy, and a threat written in red ink. That's not a misunderstanding." Amanda shrugged. "It was a joke." "A joke?" Ethan's voice was cold. "You think threatening a child is funny?" Her smirk faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, come on. You're blowing this way out of proportion. It wasn't that serious." Mark, who had been silent until now, suddenly stood up. "It was serious," he said quietly, his voice shaking slightly. "And I had no idea you did that, Amanda. I'm disgusted." Amanda spun around to face him. "What are you talking about?" Mark took a deep breath. "You've been making our lives miserable for years. I've tried to keep quiet, to support you, but I can't do it anymore." "What are you saying?" Amanda's voice wavered for the first time. "I'm saying, I want a divorce." The room fell completely silent. Amanda looked genuinely shocked, as if the idea of Mark leaving her had never crossed her mind. "You can't be serious," she whispered. Mark nodded. "I am. I've had enough." She turned to Joan and Robert, looking for support. "You're just going to let him do this? After everything we've been through?" Joan sighed heavily. "Amanda, we've tried to help you. We've defended you when no one else would. But this? Threatening Mia? There's no defending that." Robert, who rarely spoke during these meetings, finally chimed in. "We raised you better than this. You crossed a line." Amanda's face twisted with anger. "So, that's it? You're all turning against me because of her?" She pointed a finger at me, her voice full of venom. I stayed calm, refusing to let her bait me. "This isn't about me, Amanda. It's about your actions." "Oh, please," she scoffed. "You've been a problem from the start. Marrying my brother, taking over this family, acting like you're better than everyone else." Ethan stepped in, his voice firm. "Enough. This has nothing to do with my wife. This is about you, and the fact that you refuse to take responsibility for your actions." Amanda's eyes filled with tears. "You're my brother. How can you side with them?" "I'm not siding with anyone," he said quietly. "I'm protecting my family, my wife, my daughter, and you should have done the same for your family, Amanda, but instead, you hurt us." The rest of the meeting was a blur. Amanda stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Mark stayed behind for a bit, apologizing to us over and over again. "I had no idea things had gotten this bad," he said, shaking his head. "I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault," I told him gently. "We've all been dealing with this for a long time." He nodded, his expression pained. I didn't want my son to grow up thinking this kind of behavior was normal. It's not." As he left, Ethan and I sat in silence for a while, processing everything. "Did you see that coming?" I finally asked. Ethan shook his head. "Not at all. But I'm glad he's standing up for himself." I sighed. "Do you think she'll actually go through with the divorce?" Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Honestly, I don't know. But one thing's for sure, she's not going to change overnight." He was right. Amanda wasn't done causing trouble. Not by a long shot. The days following the family meeting felt surreal. Mark had filed for divorce, Amanda was furious, and the entire family was walking on eggshells. I wanted to believe that the worst was behind us, that Amanda would finally take a step back and leave us alone. But deep down, I knew better. And sure enough, it didn't take long for her to strike again. It started with whispers at Mia's school. One morning, Mia came downstairs for breakfast, her usual bright smile missing. She sat at the table quietly, pushing her cereal around with her spoon. "Everything okay, sweetie?" I asked. She shrugged. "Some kids were talking about me at school yesterday." Ethan and I exchanged a look. "What were they saying?" he asked gently. Mia hesitated, biting her lip. They said my mom cheated to help me win my reading project." I froze. "What?" Ethan said, his voice sharp. "They said I only got my reflection published because you used your connections," Mia mumbled, her eyes downcast. "That you know someone at the newspaper." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Who told them that?" Ethan pressed. Mia fidgeted with her spoon. "They said their parents heard it from someone else." She paused, then looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "It's not true, right?" I felt my heart shatter. "Of course not, baby," I said, pulling her into a hug. "You earned that recognition all on your own. You worked hard for it." Ethan stood up, pacing the kitchen, his fists clenched. "This has Amanda written all over it." I nodded. There was no doubt in my mind. Amanda must have been spreading rumors about me around town. She'd always been bitter about Mia's success, and now she was trying to ruin it for her. Later that day, Ethan called his parents again to let them know what was happening. "I don't understand why she's doing this," Joan said, clearly distressed. "After everything, you'd think she'd want to stay out of trouble." "She's not going to stop, Mom," Ethan replied. "She's made it her mission to make our lives miserable." Robert sighed heavily. "What do you want us to do?" "Honestly," Ethan said, "I think you need to stop protecting her. Stop making excuses for her behavior. She needs to face the consequences." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Joan said, "You're right." I was surprised. For years, Joan had turned a blind eye to Amanda's antics. Hearing her admit that it was time to hold Amanda accountable felt like a breakthrough. But that didn't solve our immediate problem. Mia was devastated. She started withdrawing from her favorite activities. No more reading, no more drawing. The spark that usually lit up her eyes was gone, replaced by a sadness that broke my heart. One evening, as I was tucking Mia into bed, she whispered, "Mom, do you think she's going to keep hurting us?" I sat on the edge of her bed, stroking her hair. "No, sweetheart. We're going to make sure she doesn't." "But what if she doesn't stop?" Mia asked, her voice trembling. "What if she keeps telling lies about us?" I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Sometimes people do mean things because they're unhappy," I said. "But we don't have to let their actions define us. We know the truth, and that's what matters." Mia nodded slowly, but I could tell she wasn't fully convinced. And honestly, neither was I. The final straw came a few weeks later when Ethan got a call from Mark. "She's spiraling," Mark said, his voice tired. "She's been taking out loans from shady places. I think she's in serious trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Ethan asked. Mark sighed. "Debt collectors showed up at my house yesterday. Apparently, she used my name as a guarantor on one of the loans. They're threatening legal action." Ethan rubbed his temples. "Why would she do that?" "She's desperate," Mark replied, "and she doesn't think things through. But listen, there's more. She's been saying some awful things about Mia at her son's school. Parents are starting to talk." I felt my blood boil. "She's bringing the kids into this now?" I snapped. "Yeah," Mark said sadly. "She's telling people that Mia's a spoiled brat, and that you're using connections to give her unfair advantages." Ethan clenched his jaw. "We can't let this go on." "We won't," I said firmly. "It's time to take real action." That evening, we sat down with Mia and explained what we were going to do. "We're going to make sure people know the truth," I told her, "and we're going to protect you from any more of Amanda's lies." Mia nodded, her small hands gripping mine tightly. "Okay." The next day, we contacted a lawyer. It was time to take a stand. When we walked into the lawyer's office, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. This wasn't just about Amanda's petty behavior anymore. This was about protecting my daughter and our family's reputation. The lawyer, Mr. Benson, was calm and professional. He listened carefully as Ethan and I explained everything Amanda had done, from the shredded gift to the rumors at school. "I'm sorry you've had to deal with this," he said, flipping through his notes. "Unfortunately, these types of family disputes can get messy, but you're doing the right thing by taking action." "What can we do?" Ethan asked. "We want to make sure she can't keep hurting Mia." Mr. Benson nodded. "There are a few options. We could pursue a restraining order to prevent her from contacting you or your daughter, and given the harassment at school, we could also explore a defamation case." I felt a wave of relief. Finally, someone was taking this seriously. "We want the restraining order," I said immediately. "I don't want her anywhere near Mia." "Understood," Mr. Benson replied. "We'll get started on that right away." As we left his office, Ethan squeezed my hand. "We're doing the right thing." "I know," I said, though a part of me still worried about how Amanda would react. The restraining order was granted within a week. Amanda was officially barred from contacting us or coming near Mia's school. For the first time in a long while, I felt like we had a bit of control over the situation. But Amanda wasn't done. She found new ways to lash out, through anonymous social media accounts, through whispers passed along by mutual acquaintances. I even heard from one of the school moms that Amanda had been spotted at the playground near Mia's school, watching from a distance. "She's not coming near the kids," the mom assured me. "But I thought you should know." It was like Amanda was lurking in the shadows, waiting for her chance to strike again. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, the phone rang. It was Mark. "She's gone," he said quietly. "What do you mean, gone?" Ethan asked. "She packed up her things and disappeared," Mark explained. "I think the pressure got to her. Between the divorce, the debts, and the restraining order, she couldn't handle it." I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. "Do you know where she went?" I asked. Mark sighed. "No idea. Her parents didn't let her move back in, and her friends have cut her off. She's burned too many bridges." Ethan rubbed his forehead. "And what about your son? Is he okay?" "He's doing well," Mark said with a hint of pride. "He's resilient, and he knows he's better off without her drama in his life." After the call ended, Ethan and I sat in silence for a while. "Do you think she'll come back?" I asked softly. Ethan shook his head. "I don't know, but if she does, we'll be ready." Weeks turned into months, and life slowly began to return to normal. Mia went back to her reading projects, and her smile started to come back. Her cousin remained a close friend, and their bond only grew stronger. One day, after school, Mia ran up to me, a big grin on her face. "Mom, I got another project published," she exclaimed, holding up the newspaper. I beamed with pride. "That's amazing, sweetheart." As we celebrated, I couldn't help but think about Amanda. I wondered if she'd seen the newspaper, if she was still out there somewhere, stewing in her bitterness. But I quickly pushed the thought aside. She wasn't our problem anymore. Months passed, and Amanda remained a ghost. No more anonymous posts, no more rumors, no more showing up near the school. It was as if she had vanished from our lives completely, and honestly, I wasn't sure if that was comforting or unsettling. Mia was thriving again. She started reading with the same passion she'd once had, and her cousin, Mark's son, was her biggest cheerleader. The two of them were inseparable. Mark became a close part of our lives. He and Ethan worked together to make sure both kids felt safe and supported. I never thought we'd be so close with my former brother-in-law, but the shared experience of Amanda's chaos had bonded us in a way nothing else could. One evening, Mark came over for dinner with his son. The kids ran off to play after eating, leaving the three of us sitting at the table sipping coffee. "She hasn't tried to contact you at all?" I asked Mark. He shook his head. "Not a word. Honestly, I think she's embarrassed. She burned every bridge she had." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Do you think she'll ever come back?" Mark sighed. "Maybe, but if she does, it won't be the same. She won't have the power she used to." I nodded, letting his words sink in. "She's lost everything because she couldn't let go of her bitterness," I said quietly. "It's sad, really." Mark agreed. "It is. But you can't help someone who doesn't want to change." The more time passed, the more I realized how true that was. Amanda's obsession with appearances and control had destroyed her life. She had a beautiful son, a caring husband, and a supportive family, and she threw it all away. Meanwhile, our little family had only grown stronger. Mia was the heart of it all. Her kindness, her resilience. It reminded me every day why we'd fought so hard to protect her. One evening, as I tucked her into bed, she looked up at me with those big, thoughtful eyes. "Mom?" she said softly. "Yeah, sweetie. Do you think people like Aunt Amanda can ever be happy?" Her question caught me off guard. "I don't know," I admitted. "I think people like her have a hard time finding happiness because they're always looking for it in the wrong places." Mia nodded thoughtfully. "I feel bad for her sometimes, but I'm glad we don't have to worry about her anymore." I kissed her forehead. "Me too, baby. Me too." A few months later, we heard through the grapevine that Amanda had remarried. I wasn't surprised. She always cared more about appearances than anything else. But what did surprise me was hearing that she didn't fight Mark for custody of their son. She said kids are too much responsibility, Mark told us when he came over one evening. She told him straight to his face that he was a burden. My heart broke for the boy, but he stood tall, even at such a young age. "You don't need her," he told Mia one day when they were playing in the backyard. "I don't need her either. We have our dads. We have our family." Mia smiled and gave him a hug. "Yeah, we're family." Watching them, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. Despite everything Amanda had done, these two kids were kind, resilient, and full of love. They were the best parts of us, and nothing Amanda did could ever take that away. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm after that. Ethan and I made a point to focus on the good things: family dinners, school events, lazy weekends spent watching movies and playing board games. We found peace, but most importantly, Mia found peace. She was back to being her bright, curious self. She wrote stories, devoured books, and even started teaching her cousin to read more advanced chapter books. One day, while we were cleaning out old boxes in the garage, Mia found something that made both of us pause. It was a photo from a few Christmases ago, the last one we spent with Amanda before things spiraled out of control. In the picture, Amanda was smiling, holding her son on her lap. Mia was next to her, grinning with the innocence only kids have. Mia stared at the photo for a long time before handing it to me. "She looks happy there," she said quietly. "She does," I agreed. "Do you think she was ever really happy?" I thought about it for a moment before answering. Maybe in moments. But real happiness comes from being kind, from loving the people around you. I'm not sure she ever understood that. Mia nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Let's keep this," she said, "so we don't forget." "Forget what?" I asked gently. "That people can change, but only if they really want to." I smiled, pulling her into a hug. "You're a wise kid, you know that?" She giggled. "I learned from the best." In the end, Amanda became a lesson for all of us, a reminder that bitterness and jealousy only lead to loneliness. We chose kindness. We chose love, and we chose to move forward, leaving the past where it belonged. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly at peace. We had won. Story 2. As the main provider for her family for the last 3 years, Emily Carter's life has been centered around endless duties. She used almost every income to pay for her family's necessities, including groceries, electricity, rent, and Chloe's personal gains. Despite her sacrifices, Emily's hard-earned money appeared to disappear before she could spend it on herself. In her household, gratitude was an uncommon guest. Emily's mother mentioned Emily's financial contributions one evening. Her voice was abrasive and accusing. "Emily, I've observed that you no longer express gratitude for all we do for you. After all, you live here for free. You have a right to contribute." Halfway to her mouth, Emily froze her fork. "I've been paying you almost my whole paycheck for the past 3 years, Mom. This roof over our heads and everything else has been paid for by me. Do you not believe that calling me ungrateful is unfair?" The look on her mother's face hardened. "Without us, Emily, you couldn't have attended college. Don't you have an obligation to support your families?" Chloe, who was sitting close by with her phone in her hand, said without raising her head, "You are the oldest indeed. That's what you should do." Emily's jaw tightened, anger seething under the surface. She looked at her father, who was sitting quietly as usual and would not speak out. As her parents relished their relaxed retirement, her bitterness increased with each minute, and Chloe blindly depended on her for support. Emily was caught up in a never-ending cycle of work and responsibilities. Emily frequently questioned why her sacrifices were ignored for so long. To keep her family stable, she had postponed her own goals and aspirations. She couldn't recall the last time she had taken a day off without feeling bad or purchased anything nice for herself. She felt as though she couldn't afford even the little pleasures, like going out to eat with friends. However, rather than viewing her efforts as a sacrifice, her family viewed them as an expectation. Emily felt even more alone as a result of her mother's combative tone. She was emotionally exhausted by the ongoing financial strain, and her previously intimate connection with her family had become a transactional one. "How come this weight is supposed to fall solely on me?" Emily's voice trembled with a mixture of fatigue and rage as she inquired. "You all get to enjoy life without doing a thing, but I have to give up everything since I work full-time." Her mom laughed. "Emily, we've done our share. For years, your father and I put forth a lot of effort to provide you with a comfortable existence. It's your chance to take the initiative now." "That doesn't mean I have to give up my life, though," Emily fired back. "For everything I've done, I deserve some recognition and some independence." There was quiet as her words lingered in the air. Chloe rolled her eyes and mumbled to herself, "Drama queen." Emily became even more frustrated as the emotional toll of her family's disdain started to mount. Knowing that she would be greeted with more demands and no gratitude, Emily began to dread returning home from work. The burden of continual pressure caused her once vibrant personality to fade. She began to wonder if she had been tricked into thinking she owed the family her life, or if her participation in their household was genuinely motivated by love. She became increasingly aware of how one-sided the relationship had become as she thought back on her sacrifices. "I am not a machine." One night, while lying awake and gazing at the ceiling, Emily pondered, "I have my own wants and aspirations. When can I start living my life?" Emily was reluctant to face her family head-on, even though her animosity was rising. She didn't say anything, since she didn't want to offend them or be accused of being selfish, but she knew in her heart that she couldn't continue on her current course. The most agonizing insight was how readily her relatives disregarded her difficulties. Emily's efforts were seen by them as merely a part of her responsibilities as the oldest daughter. Her mother commended Chloe for her charm and promise, while her father would remark in passing how delighted he was of her carefree attitude. Emily, however, received the treatment of an unseen practitioner. Everyone else's wants and feelings came before hers. Her family would dismiss her grievances even when she found the strength to voice them. Each encounter widened the gap between Emily and her family by calling her ungrateful or too emotional. She started to realize how drastically different her life was from the one she desired. The seeds of change had been sown, but it would take more fortitude than she ever imagined to escape the cycle of guilt and reliance. Emily Carter's early years were a patchwork of short-lived happiness and long-lasting sadness. She yearned for her parents' affection and attention as a child, But after the birth of her younger sister Chloe, their priorities completely changed. Emily could still clearly recall the proud and excited expressions on her parents' faces the day they welcomed Chloe home. "She's so cute." Cradling the little infant, her mother cooed, "Emily, now you are the older sister. You will look after her, won't you?" Initially, Emily enthusiastically accepted her new position, wanting to love and protect her younger sister. But the attention she used to get diminished as the days stretched into weeks. Emily was left on her alone as her parents focused all of their attention on Chloe. The beloved oldest daughter had become a shadow in her own household. Chloe appeared to get unending love and luxury from Emily's parents. Chloe would receive toys and sweets from her father. As he watched her play, his countenance brightened. Emily, however, frequently received contemptuous assurances. Her father used to remark, "Next time, I'll get you a toy." But that never happened. Emily's father's tolerance soon ran out whenever she expressed a want for the same presence or attention. "Emily, stop being envious. You're older. You ought to be more aware." His voice would rise in irritation as he snapped. Emily would feel inconspicuous and invisible as the room would go quiet, except for Chloe's sobs, while their father consoled her. The wound was only made worse by her mother's lack of concern. When Emily needed assistance or consolation, her mother's reaction was aloof and uncaring. "Why are you unable to manage this on your own?" She would dismiss Emily's sentiments by saying, "You're old enough." The reprimands were severe and frequent. Emily is left to doubt her value. Emily's responsibilities increased as Chloe got older. She was supposed to take care of Chloe, assist with household duties, and do her own studies without complaining. "The big sister is you. You ought to lead by example." While Chloe relished carefree days full of play and laughter, her mother frequently reminded her. Emily's life consisted of a lot of responsibilities. While her mother lavished Chloe with attention, she would clean up after meals, fold clothing, and wash dishes. Demands disrupted even the smallest moments of happiness, such as finding time to read a book. "Come assist me with the groceries, Emily." Her mom would give her a call. Or, "Before you begin your homework, remember to hang the clothes." It seemed as though her wants and needs were unimportant. On Chloe's birthday, the difference in treatment was glaringly obvious. She would get expensive presents, and the home would be decked out with balloons and streamers. Emily's birthdays, on the other hand, were usually modest and unassuming, with a plain cake and a vague "happy birthday." Emily's self-esteem suffered long-term effects from the partiality and neglect. She was raised with the idea that other people's needs and feelings were more significant than her own. She became a people-pleaser as a result of her mother's contemptuous behavior and her father's stern remarks. She learned to repress her feelings out of a desperate need for acceptance and a concern that doing so would result in further rejection or reprimands. She chose to ignore her suffering and focus on her studies in the hopes that she would gain the respect and affection she so desperately desired. However, Chloe's slightest triumphs eclipsed hers, regardless of how brilliantly she performed. As her mother would display it on the refrigerator, she would say, "Look how well Chloe drew this picture." Uncelebrated and forgotten, Emily's accolades and diplomas were hidden away in drawers. Emily eventually learned to conceal her suffering. Putting on a strong front, she endured the emotional disregard and partiality that had become her everyday life in silence. However, a silent animosity started to develop. A seed sown in her early years that would later motivate her to recover her feeling of value. Although her early life experiences influenced who she was now, they also made her long for a life free from incessant criticism, undervaluation, and overshadowing. Throughout her adult life, she continued to fight in silence, hoping to escape the pattern of neglect and forge her own way. Emily Carter anticipated that her diligence and hard work would eventually grant her some independence when she entered adulthood. She continued to prioritize her family's needs, even though she had a difficult full-time job as a business analyst. Her days started early as she rushed to work while balancing domestic duties, and they finished late as she cleaned up after supper while her family rested. To them, no matter how much she accomplished, it was never enough. She encountered opposition to her wish to be independent. "Mom, Dad, I think it's time I move out and start living on my own," she said warily one evening when she brought up the subject. Her mother scowled at once. "Emily, go out. How could you possibly consider abandoning us? You must be here." Her dad added his voice. "That's not what you're ready for. Living alone may be costly and risky. Besides, who's going to clean up around here?" Emily's chest constricted. "For years, I've been handling everything. I can't do this indefinitely. I need room to develop and lead a life of my own." Her mother's speech became abrasive. "Space. This is how you pay us back for everything we've done for you?" "Emily, you're being self-centered." Their remarks were incisive, arousing mistrust and guilt. Though they are continual reminders of past sacrifices and covert charges of ingratitude, Emily was aware that they depended on her financially, felt like shackles preventing her from going after her goals. "Without us, you couldn't have attended college." "One day," her mother reminded her. "Staying and providing for your family right now is the least you can do." Emily's frustrations were nonchalantly dismissed by Chloe, who also participated in the chorus. "You're just thinking too much. Emily, you are the oldest. You have an obligation to assist us." Her parents painted themselves as the victims of her ambition and interpreted her want for freedom as betrayal, a subtle but oppressive emotional manipulation. They would take between begging her to stay and berating her for even thinking about going. Furthermore, with each raise or promotion, her family's expectations simply increased. From home improvements to Chloe's interests, Emily's family found new ways to spend her earnings. As soon as her salary arrived, it was gone. Her father would laugh if she made any suggestion that she wanted to save money for the future. "Which future? Your future lies with your family." Emily put all of her efforts into helping them, but she felt imprisoned by their unreasonable demands and lack of gratitude. They lived a relaxed lifestyle, not caring about her health. Emily's annoyance started to grow, seething deep inside. She could no longer deny the financial and emotional toll that her family's continual dependence on her was taking on her. Whenever she tried to stand up for herself, she was greeted with shame, rage, or mockery. However, Emily felt in her heart that something needed to change. She could no longer live her life according to the demands and expectations of her family. Her internalized animosity was an indication that she was about to lose it and would have to take charge of her own life. Emily Carter has always felt that she had an obligation to provide for her family. Her employment gave her financial security. However, the majority of her $77,000 yearly paycheck was spent on family bills. Her family seldom ever recognized her efforts in spite of her sacrifices. They used her money as a resource to pay for their victories and necessities. The burden of duty became too much for Emily to bear, leaving her with nothing to save or enjoy for herself. Emily's life was all about work and meeting her family's never-ending needs. She had little time for enjoyment or personal development. Although remorse and a sense of duty held her back, she yearned for independence. One day, Emily's employer offered access to a workplace counselor as part of their employee wellness program. After some hesitation, Emily made the decision to go to a session in the hopes of gaining some understanding. The kind and perceptive counselor listened to Emily's challenges. Emily described the years of mental and financial hardship. The counselor's face became grave. "Emma," she replied softly, "it sounds like financial domestic violence based on what you're stating." Emily was surprised at the phrase. "Financial domestic violence," she repeated, clearly perplexed. The therapist clarified. "When someone is manipulated financially, it's considered abuse. Excessive requests for money are part of it. Based on what you've shared, guilt-tripping and limiting your capacity to spend your own income for personal purposes. It's possible that your family is controlling your mind." It dawned on Emily like a wave. The pieces started to fit together, even though she had never thought about her circumstances in that way. The demands of her family never stop. A poisonous relationship was indicated by their contempt for her sacrifices and their exploitation of her emotions. She was unable to ignore it any longer. Emily stayed awake that night, mentally reciting the counselor's comments. She had taken up the family's financial responsibilities for years without protest, feeling that, as the oldest daughter, it was her responsibility. However, She now realized how severely her mental and emotional health had been impacted by her family's actions. The next morning, she plucked up the strength to go to her parents. "Mom, Dad, I've decided," she said firmly. "I'm leaving." Her mother's shocked eyes grew wide. "Don't be silly, Emily. You must be here." Her father's tone was stern, and he crossed his arms. "This is how you pay us back for everything we've done for you?" Emily stayed composed, yet determined. "Although I am grateful for everything you have done, I cannot continue to jeopardize my future and happiness. I need to take charge of my own life now." As expected, her family's response was contemptuous. From the sofa, Chloe sneered. "You can't survive alone for a month. We've always been there for you." "You're being selfish, Emily," her mother said. "Who is going to run the home? You cannot simply leave your family in this manner." It hurt what they said. Emily, however, was not going to give up. For the first time, she realized that their contempt was not a result of her flaws, but rather of their reliance on her. Their refusal to accept her difficulties just made her determination to stick with her choice stronger. Emily started getting ready to relocate. Nearby, she saw a little apartment that would provide her with the independence and space she so much desired. Despite the very taxing nature of the procedure, she felt empowered at every turn. The day she left home, the tone of her family became softer. "Emily, please think again," her mother begged. "Without you, I'll be lost." Emily, however, remained steadfast. She answered, "I have to do this for me. I need to take charge of my life." She had a mixture of relief and melancholy as she left through the door. She felt free for the first time in years, even though she knew the journey ahead would not be simple. Free to put her own pleasure first and create the future the way she wants it. It was Emily Carter's time to face her family and take charge of her life. She had finally made the decision to leave them after years of letting their incessant demands take precedence over her happiness. The living room was filled with her family. They sensed a finality in Emily's tone that they had never heard before. "I've decided," Emily said firmly. Despite the knot in her stomach, she spoke steadily. "I'll be leaving next week." Disbelief instantly clouded her mother's face. "You can't be serious, Emily. We've been a family all along. How could you possibly consider abandoning us?" Chloe grinned as she relaxed on the couch. "I wish you luck in handling everything by yourself. It's the first time you've lived alone. You'll return in a hurry." Emily turned to face her father, who sat quietly, ignoring her sister's sarcastic comment. Crossed arms. When he did speak, his voice was sharp. "Emily, you're being self-centered. This is how you pay us back for everything we've done for you? You are aware of our reliance on you." Tears filled her mother's eyes. She tried another tactic, her voice trembling. "Think of us, Emily. We're growing older. If you go, then who will look after us? Your father put a lot of effort into providing you with a comfortable life." "She still needs you, Chloe." Emily experienced the well-known twinge of guilt. She didn't allow it to take hold this time, though. With an unwavering voice, she stated, "I've been there for this family for years. My life has been put on hold. Almost everything I've earned has been given to you. I need to live for myself now. I can't keep sacrificing my future." Her father scoffed. "You'll regret this, Emily. Living alone isn't as easy as you think. What happens when you struggle? Who will you turn to then?" Her mother chimed in. "We've given you so much, Emily. The least you can do is stay and help us. Don't be so cold-hearted." Emily drew a long breath, studying herself against their torrent of shame and accusations. "I'm not abandoning you," she murmured, addressing their gaze, "but I can't keep living like this. I deserve a chance to establish my own life, just like you had yours." Chloe rolled her eyes and mumbled to herself, "Drama queen." But Emily didn't falter. She had come too far to turn down now. Her family's appeals got increasingly frantic, but Emily stayed firm. "I've made my decision," she said firmly. "This isn't about abandoning someone. It's about finally prioritizing myself." As Emily moved into her room to pack, her family sat astonished. Their emotional manipulation failed for the first time. Her heart felt heavy, yet a strange sense of freedom began to emerge within her. For years, she had lived for others, but now she was choosing herself. She knew the path ahead would be tough. However, She felt a weight lift as she shut her door. There was no going back from this initial move toward taking back her life. For Emily Carter, moving out was both thrilling and scary. She was alone for the first time in her life, liberated from her family's incessant expectations and demands. She felt lonely in her tiny apartment in the suburbs of New York, but tranquil. A far cry from the mayhem she had left behind, she had to get used to living alone, which made the first several days difficult. Emily had to climb a steep learning curve from setting up utilities to handling her own budget, but as time went on, she began to enjoy her newfound freedom. Emily could finally spend her salary for herself without having to worry about meeting her family's financial expectations. She started experimenting with small pleasures like going out to eat, remodeling her flat, and picking up long-forgotten pastimes. In years, for the first time. She believed she was in charge of her own life. Her family's circumstances at home drastically changed. Without Emily's financial assistance, they had a hard time getting by. Her parents struggled to pay for home expenditures because they were retired and had little money saved. Chloe, who had always depended on Emily's income, had to face the truth about their financial situation. The family started contacting Emily frequently out of desperation. Her phone was inundated with texts and calls begging her to come back. "Without you, Emily, we couldn't accomplish this," the voicemail from her mother begged. "Please return. We were mistaken." Emily, however, remained steadfast. She refused to repeat the pattern of giving up her future and happiness for her family, which she had done for years. She understood their hardships, but she also realized that leaving was the best course of action for her own welfare. Emily was relieved and proud of herself as she thought back on her adventure. The financial and emotional restraints that had long confined her had been lifted. Her life is focused on personal development and self-care. On the weekends, she traveled, made new friends, and created a whole unique life for herself. Emily decided to concentrate on the future, even though she could still feel her family's disappointment. With every day that went by, she realized how important it was to put herself first. She welcomed the liberty and contentment she had long earned. Story 3. Sophia, Ellie's mother, had always impressed Ellie with her fortitude and tenacity. After Ellie's father abandoned them before she was even born, Sophia had to raise Ellie alone. Ellie believed that their relationship was unshakable, since for years it was just the two of them against the world. Sophia put forth a lot of effort to support her kid, adamant about providing Ellie with a better life than she had. With Sophia's second marriage, things started to shift. Her recent spouse, Ellie believed that Mark, a quiet guy with a reliable career, would provide some stability in their life. A few years later, Sophia gave birth to twin boys, bringing laughter and pleasure to the home. Or so it appeared. But Ellie sensed the change almost instantly under the surface. Her mother's emphasis, which had previously been all on her, started to shift to the twins. Ellie first attempted to be sympathetic. Where she could, she offered assistance, believing that their relationship will return to normal when the twins grew older and that it was only a phase. But things just got worse. Sophia grew aloof, and her once friendly attitude with Ellie cooled. Eventually, Sophia and Mark revealed the financial burden of parenting twins during a heated family conversation. They were no longer able to provide for Ellie. Ellie was informed she had to move out when she was barely 17, feeling deceived and abandoned. After packing her things, Ellie departed the house she had known her entire life. She was thrown into an unfamiliar environment and had to mature far earlier than she had ever anticipated. She had no idea that this was the beginning of a journey that would change the way she thought about love, family, and resiliency. Ellie can still clearly recall the day she was ordered to leave when she was only 17. She was thrown into an emotional maelstrom that included uncertainty, rage, and heartache. She kept thinking about what her mother had said. Simply put, "We can no longer afford to keep you here." She gathered her things. She left the mansion that had been her safe refuge, her hands shaking. She had no notion how she was going to live, no strategy, and no direction. Her grandparents were the only people she could turn to. Although they embraced her, Ellie sensed that they were disappointed by Sophia's choice. They were retired and on a fixed income, yet they provided her with a place to live. Ellie was aware that she couldn't rely on them for very long. Resolute in carrying her own burden, Ellie started looking for a part-time job right away. She ultimately secured a job at a nearby cafe, juggling weekend and after-school stints. Although the money was little, it was sufficient to meet her need: school supplies, bus tickets, and a little more for unforeseen circumstances. It was a difficult adjustment from a carefree adolescent to a young adult with obligations. Her days turned into a haze of late nights and early mornings. She would get up early to get ready for school, spend her afternoons cramming through her assignments, and then go directly to work. Despite the constant weariness, Ellie persevered because she was determined to succeed in life. Because money was always tight, she had to make compromises all the time. To save money, she wore the same few clothes and avoided social events. She knew she couldn't afford to indulge on anything other than necessities, so on some evenings, she went to bed hungry. Ellie was committed to her studies in spite of the difficulties. She was aware that it was her path to a brighter future, but maintaining motivation was a struggle in and of itself. On other evenings, the stress of her circumstances felt like it might crush her. She frequently questioned how her life had devolved into this. How the mother could so readily abandon her after claiming to love her without conditions. The most difficult aspect was the loneliness. Because she couldn't relate to her peers' carefree lifestyles, Ellie felt alienated at school. While her reality was a never-ending battle to make ends meet, she admired their tales of weekend plans and family trips. She was scared of the pitying glances and uncomfortable silences that would follow, so she hardly ever talked about her home life. Ellie's greatest strength, however, was her tenacity. Little triumphs, her first paycheck, passing a challenging test, and the odd, encouraging remark from her grandparents gave her comfort. She eventually came to value her freedom. Every obstacle she surmounted served as a reminder of her resilience and a step toward the life she had always dreamed of. Despite the uncertainty of the path ahead, Ellie refused to allow her situation define who she was. One day she will create a life free from dependence on others, she promised herself. A life in which she would be able to rise above everything, not as someone who was abandoned. Ellie had a rather unusual path to college. Without the help of her stepfather or mother, she was on her own to go through the procedure. Determined to build a future for herself, she worked diligently at her part-time job while balancing her studies. Her requirement for a co-signer for her education debts was the most obstacle. Her parents vehemently objected, saying they needed to preserve money for the baby's future. Their rejection served as a bitter reminder of their low regard for her. Fortunately, Ellie's uncle took over, yet not directly connected to her life. He agreed to co-sign her debt with one stipulation, since he respected her tenacity. She had to swear that she would never let him pay for it. "I appreciate his trust." Ellie promised to put in a lot of effort and make sure all payments were completed on schedule. She eventually started along the road to further study with that help. Life in college was hectic. Ellie decided to major in business at a public institution in the hopes of securing a steady job. Back-to-back classes, study sessions, and part-time jobs at a local bookstore made for exhausting days for her. The financial burden was enormous. Loan payments, groceries, rent, and textbooks hung over her like a threatening fog. She struggled to make ends meet, and frequently relied on late-night coffee and quick noodles. Ellie did not have the luxury of contacting home for assistance. Unlike her friends, she was unable to talk about her problems or celebrate her successes. Her grandparents, who occasionally wrote letters full of encouraging words and tiny care gifts, were the closest thing to family support for her mother. Ellie was kept grounded and reminded that she wasn't entirely alone by these small gestures of affection. Ellie thrived academically in spite of the difficulties. Determining to maximize her education, she devotes herself fully to her studies. While her peers partied on the weekends, she looked for internships, attended networking events, and made contacts wherever she could. Ellie used hers to plan her future and conduct industry research. She was aware that her degree was her key to freedom, and not simply a piece of paper. When Ellie crossed the stage to accept her diploma, it was a melancholy graduation day. Knowing her mother wouldn't be present, she looked around the throng. The sight of her grandparents, who had traveled despite their advanced age, gave her comfort even if the absence was painful. They applauded her and clapped. Their teary eyes betray their pride. Ellie would never forget that moment, a testament to her perseverance and hard effort. Ellie immediately entered the workforce after graduating. Eager to prove herself, she secured an entry-level position with a marketing company. The first several years were difficult. Rent, electricity, and loan payments were all barely covered by her wages, leaving little money for other expenses. Determined to make a name for herself and advance in the company, she frequently worked late into the night. Financial balancing was a never-ending battle. Luxuries like eating out or new clothes were seldom indulgences, and every dollar was tracked down. There were times when Ellie questioned if she would ever be able to escape the pattern of living paycheck to paycheck, but every obstacle just strengthened her resolve. She refused to allow short-term setbacks dictate her destiny, since she was proud of how far she had gone. Ellie's diligence gradually paid off. At work, she started to get noticed, get promoted, and take on more challenging tasks. She finally felt stable when her once-empty savings account began to increase. As she negotiated adulthood, the perseverance, tenacity, and self-control she had acquired throughout her undergraduate years continued to serve as her compass. Ellie never lost sight of the sacrifices she had to make in order to reach her current position. Although her path wasn't straightforward, it helped her become a person who could take on any task. She was demonstrating to the world and to herself that she was so much more than the girl her family had abandoned by creating a life on her terms. Ellie's path through the business world was evidence of her unwavering willpower and perseverance. She gave her all to her work at a marketing agency after graduation, beginning at the bottom and putting forth endless effort to establish her value. She immediately established a reputation for having keen problem-solving abilities, original ideas, and the capacity to lead under duress. Her efforts were rewarded, and she rose through the ranks of the company in a matter of years, receiving one promotion. One after the other, Ellie maintained her concentration and humility in spite of her increasing success. She wasn't going to take her achievements for granted, since she understood that the challenges she had encountered had helped to mold her into the person she was today. She made her career her first focus and continued to push herself with each accomplishment. She surmounted obstacles including difficult teen relationships and late-night assignments with poise and tenacity. Ellie eventually attained a position she had previously only imagined. CEO of a successful technology business, it was the result of years of arduous labor, selflessness, and unwavering determination. However, she decided to keep her accomplishment a secret. Ellie wasn't the kind to look to other people for approval, particularly those who had previously questioned her or abandoned her. Only a select group of people, including her uncle, who had played a crucial role in assisting her in beginning her journey, were informed of the news, through her student loan co-signing. One evening over dinner, Ellie confided in her uncle about her promotion and thanked him for helping her through her most trying years. Ellie's uncle grinned proudly and insisted that she was solely responsible for her achievement. He couldn't help but tell the rest of the family how pleased he was of her. Unfortunately, at a family get-together, this well-intentioned act started a series of events that Ellie hadn't expected. Unaware of their tense relationship, her uncle casually told her mother, Sophia, about her accomplishment. The news surprised Sophia, and her astonishment soon gave way to hatred. Ellie's accomplishment served as a reminder of her decisions. Without her, the daughter she had rejected had created a remarkable life. Sophia didn't waste any time in finding Ellie, not to offer her congratulations or patch up their strained relationship, but to take care of herself. Not long after, she arrived at Ellie's house bearing the burden of their unresolved history. After years of quiet, Ellie believed that her mother's sudden interest in her life was opportunistic and empty. She had earned her success on her own, and she had no intention of letting her mother's return overshadow her accomplishments. Ellie had no idea that this encounter would lead to a confrontation that would call into question everything she had fought so hard to overcome. Ellie opened her door after hearing an unexpected knock on a calm evening. She was startled to find Mark and her mother, Sophia, standing there. Stepfather. The scene evoked a wave of recollections. Even though she was shocked, Ellie remained calm and allowed them inside after she had put a lot of effort on burying them. She wanted to know what had caused them to come so quickly. Sophia made clumsy efforts at small chat as the discussion began stiffly after so many years of stillness. Her genuine aim, however, soon became apparent. "Your success has been communicated to us." With a tone that was more demanding than proud, Sophia started. "I'm happy to hear that you've made great progress, but we need your assistance immediately." Ellie's eyebrow went up. "What can you help with?" Mark said, his tone hard but steady. "We're having financial difficulties as the twins prepare to enter college. We assumed you would want to support your family because you're doing so well." Ellie felt a knot in her gut. She was astounded by their request's boldness. They now expected her to step in and cover her siblings' tuition after years of desertion, as if history had never occurred. "Are you serious?" With a hint of incredulity in her voice, Ellie inquired. "You threw me out of the house and left me on my own, and now you want me to pay for their college." Sophia's face became stern. "Ellie, it wasn't like that. You know, it was difficult in those days. For the sake of the family, we had to make sacrifices." Ellie lost her fury. "Offerings. You mean the sacrifice was me? When I most needed you, you left me. I had to learn how to survive and do all of my college coursework on my own. You now wish to use guilt to get me to assist you?" As the disagreement intensified, tension in the room increased. Sophia attempted to defend their behavior by asserting that they had acted in accordance with their then-current best judgment. But that didn't sit well with Ellie. She told them about the years she worked at several jobs, the absence of family support as she was trying to establish a life for herself, as well as the loneliness she experienced around milestones and holidays. Ellie responded in a calm but acerbic tone. "You made it clear that I wasn't a priority. And now, after all these years, you come here to demand money rather than to express regret or make apologies. Just because it suits you doesn't mean you have the right to change history." Mark tried to diffuse the tension by implying that Ellie was being too severe. "Ellie, they're our siblings. You want to see them succeed, don't you?" Unwavering in her conviction, Ellie shook her head. "You are in charge of them, not me. Years have passed since you made your decision, and now I'm making mine. I refuse to be coerced into tidying up your mess." Sophia became quite irritated. She said that Ellie owed them for the years that Sophia reared her alone, and accused her of being ungrateful and self-centered. However, Ellie refused to allow remorse influence her choice and kept her ground. Ellie firmly remarked, "This conversation is over," and got up from her chair. "I made my decisions, and you made yours. Don't bother returning if you ever attempt to manipulate or guilt me again." Without another word, Sophia and Mark looked at one another in shock, knowing they had lost the war. Ellie stood by herself in her apartment as they departed, shutting the door behind them. She had an odd mixture of despair and relief. It had been a hard, yet liberating confrontation. After refusing to let anybody over, she had at last established a distinct line. Ellie felt in charge of her life and her story for the first time in years. She was free of the burden of her history. Sophia wasn't prepared to let go of the altercation with her mother, but Ellie believed she had moved over it. Ellie's receptionist contacted her a few weeks later, and she seemed nervous. She replied softly, "Your mother is here. She is refusing to leave and is asking to see you." Ellie's heart fell. She didn't want to get into another fight, especially at work. She inhaled deeply and instructed the receptionist to let Sophia know she wasn't available. Sophia eventually departed after a stressful few minutes, but Ellie knew that this was not the end of it. When Ellie got home from work the following day, things became more heated. Sophia was waiting at her front door when she arrived. Sophia's voice was strong and uncompromising as she stated, "We need to talk." Ellie kept her distance and answered, "I've said everything I need to say. You must go." However, when Ellie turned to unlock her door, Sophia Dean backed down. She was abruptly attacked by Sophia, who grabbed her arm and screamed that Ellie had destroyed her life. Ellie was able to push her away and make a help call, but things soon became violent. Sophia became enraged and lashed out, accusing Ellie of being responsible for all of her problems. Fortunately, Ellie's neighbors alerted the police after hearing the disturbance. Ellie's stepfather had already arrived and was attempting to soothe Sophia when the police came. However, it was too late. Ellie had had enough. The very next day, she applied for a restraining order and filed charges for the attack. Ellie felt that was the best way to keep herself safe, even if it was a hard choice. Ellie's lawyer assisted in getting a restraining order swiftly after the police recorded the incident. The lawsuit seemed like an essential move to get her calm back. Her life has been plagued by her mother's shadow for far too long. She could now put an end to this chapter permanently since she had legal protection and defined limitations. Although that wasn't the conclusion Ellie had hoped for, it was necessary for her to genuinely move on. Ellie sat in her apartment silence. She considered her journey from a scared adolescent thrown into adulthood to a self-assured and successful CEO. It had not been an easy path for her, but each obstacle helped to mold her into the strong woman she is now. Although the encounter with her mother had been unpleasant, it had also provided insight. Ellie came to the realization that she had been burdened by her past for too long. The moment has come to let go. She was no longer defined by her mother's behavior, and it had no influence on her destiny. With a feeling of fresh intent, Ellie made the decision to go forward once more. She started looking for a new house, a larger, lighter one that would represent her achievement and development. It went beyond simply improving her living conditions. It was about letting go of the ghosts of her past and starting over. Ellie made the decision to put herself first and surround herself with people who truly cared about her. She was prepared to completely embrace the independent and strong life she had created, striding boldly into the future and letting go of the hurt of the past.